Welcome to the Yellow Coat Club podcast. My name is Sean Little, and I will be guiding you through just what's kind of on my heart and on my mind today. It's big things going on. As you can see behind me, normally there is a bookcase that is filled with books. We meticulously spent time, curating books and getting the bookshelves and, putting, this office together, but really it was putting our home together. And through a series of callings and, God really just knocking on our door, leading us to a new place, we're driving out in a couple days. Driving out and we're heading to Michigan. We're not going to be in Michigan forever, but that is going to be the next stop in our journey of where God is calling us. And, it's really left me in this state where I'm just in a state of remembrance, in a state of gratitude. And so I just want to share some of those thoughts with you today at where I'm at and how God's kind of speaking into our lives. So I rarely do this, but as some of you know, and if you haven't known, I wrote a book called The Yellow Coat Club. And the subtitle is Be Courageous, Stop Hiding, and Start Becoming. I felt like there's so much importance in the being courageous part because it calls us into something. Doesn't call us to be small, doesn't call us to sit back off to the side. It calls us into something greater. And so in that, the follow-up is to stop hiding. And for those of you that don't believe that you're hiding, maybe you're not. But for many of us, we know the things that we hide from. We might be unwilling to admit it, but there is a hiding behind comfort. There's a hiding behind stories. There's a hiding behind so many things that we do. We hide behind. We even hide behind things that normally people would think are good. People hide behind service. Think about how many people are in churches that, give. Very, very, very busy. But it's the doing aspect versus ever really connecting to the fact of who they are in Christ. And could quite possibly be giving out of place that fills them and it becomes about them. And so we can hide behind good things. For me, it was sad. I hid behind a bottle of liquor. And then the start becoming. Becoming is this active verb. It is this continuation of, for me, it's movement. It's progressing. It's the becoming of something. And I've said, and I'll say it again, that the becoming ends when you end. And so all of this coming together, I recently heard that, humans were created for growth. And so this idea of becoming, this progression, this movement forward is not innate from who we are, but it is exactly in line with who we are. We were created for this, to become. And if you open the book, right at the beginning, I strategically, but very just carefully picked this verse from the Living Bible translation. And it was a verse that carried me, through, some of the hardest times that led me all the way through to sobriety. So I'll read it. Look and be amazed, for I'm doing something in your lifetime that you wouldn't believe even if I told you. Habakkuk 1:5. And so that's where we are today, is this looking back in order to look forward. This amaze that God, has done in my life, and I've seen it done in other people's lives as well. But this is speaking from my experience, my story, and man, it's crazy to think that there's been so much buildup, so much preparation, and all of a sudden, the time is coming. The hour has come, and we're off. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I'd heard it somewhat from a teaching from a pastor, and it was talking about these moments of faith that we have in our life. And this idea that we have these big moments of faith, but when we just live our life in that one time that we had that one big moment of faith, it's almost as if we forget what it means to step out into faith. It's not an isolated event. We might have a big event that happened in our life, but faith is not determined by the size of the faith, but the quality, which is a consistent trusting and stepping into the calling that God has on each of our lives. And so it was this notion that, yesterday's faith is today's obedience, and yet it is not sufficient for tomorrow's calling. And so thinking of this idea that there was a moment in my life that I took this step forward, and it was a moment of faith. But if my life is defined by that one moment, then I have stopped becoming. I have stopped flexing that muscle of faith. Anybody that goes to the gym or anybody that has worked out and progressively built muscle or endurance, it didn't just happen. It was that constant testing of the body, pushing it beyond its limit, the tearing down of muscles in order for them to grow again. Yesterday's faith is today's obedience. Because there comes a time when that weight just becomes the new norm. That faith becomes your normal obedience as it is today. And we step forward. And yet there is even more calling on the other side of that. It doesn't diminish the decisions that you've made in the past, but what it does is it beckons us into this new future of constantly walking in faith with Christ. You can see it. You go read the Old Testament and you see these heroes of faith that step forward. And it's not one isolated incident. It's one after the next, after the next, after the next, believing that they were being led to somewhere, even if they could not see where they were being led to. And I don't believe that life is any different today. I think many of us choose to live as if life is different today, but it's not. And so if we live our lives simply by that one moment, then I think it leaves us stagnant. We have become. That was my moment of faith. And yet for anybody that, played high school sports or, once won an award, if that was the ultimate, the all of your achievement coming together into one moment, people almost have this depressive side on the other end. Where do I go from here? You become. You continue to move forward and step in faith. You celebrate, you enjoy those big moments. And then you continue to live out, stepping forward into a new future. And so we see this. It's interesting, we talk about the hall of faith. And so I even, today started jotting down these big moments of faith. My wife calls them altar moments. It's very, has a biblical tie to it, that building of the monument in which it's a remembrance of some big shift in your life. But if you go look at the altars, it wasn't we built that one altar. They built multiple altars to remember, but they kept moving forward. And so as I started looking at that, I was thinking of, these moments, and this is really only starting when, I was 28. I could go back further into different moments of my life, but I do know that the culmination came when, I went, and had a near life or death experience around alcohol and other drug usage. And, there was that step of faith in admitting that I was an alcoholic. Because that statement, that admittance, changed the trajectory of the rest of my life, because I could never take back what I knew to be true. And by faith, I, came to this point where I realized that, my brother had gone through something, I had gone through something in life. By faith, I realized I needed to go back to a place where I felt like I no longer belonged in order for me to heal. It is the place that I would claim as home. And so by faith, I call my brother and tell him, hey, I think God's calling me back to come live with you and help, out with the kids. And I think this is going to be good for both of us as we rebuild our lives. And so I went. Didn't really look back. And it wasn't easy. I beat my head against the wall. I lost jobs. I even have thought about, what would have happened had I not lost some of the jobs and the mess that I would have made deeper and deeper and deeper. And I kept hitting my head against a wall, feeling like I was going to fail. And then I got to that moment, which was that next step of faith going, God, if you're going to be with me, I'm all in. But I got to know that you're with me. And I'll be all in. And so from that moment, it became all about this getting away from the thing that was destroying my life. And, I was freed from the bondage of alcoholism. And it was a daily progression, step by step by step by step. And by faith, I reached out to my sister and started to rebuild a relationship with her. And by her faith, she invited me to come and, live in Mexico and serve alongside her at these orphanages. And so by faith, it was this idea that, hey, I'm packing up my stuff. I'm going to Mexico. And I remember when I was doing that, there was this thought that kept coming to me, is that if I don't go, I will always wonder what would have happened. And I made an agreement with myself at that time. I'm not going to live my life that way. I call it the chip on my shoulder, whatever you want. I had wasted far too many years hurting, thinking I squandered my life, and I did not want to live in that place ever again. And so I decided to go. I could always return. That's the myth that we think that, if I step out, depending on the decisions that you are making, it could be something that if you fail, everything's ruined. Or you just don't know what's going to happen on the other side, and you could be pleasantly surprised. It might not be the thing that you think that you're going towards, but it's like that, that quote where it's like, shoot for the moon, and if you don't make it, you'll land among the stars. Like, there's some truth in that. Just go. Trust. Put your life into the hand it's put your life into the hand of God. And so many people are making decisions where they believe, it's great. You're operating out of your own agency. And yet when I sit here and I say that we were all created intentionally and on purpose, like, you have a creator. That creator knows what you were made for. And if you are following that still small voice, your life is going to be so much different than you could have ever possibly imagined. It's going to be hard. It's going to require something of you. And yet, I've gotten to a place where I don't want to live life any other way. And so, went to Mexico. And I remember, even kind of in that moment where, do I look back? Do I go forward? It was this, I always wanted to be someone who could take a risk, to be daring. And here was my moment to prove it to myself that I could keep going, that I could actually be all in and go live a life that I could not fathom. And for those of you that are familiar with the movie Braveheart, I love this quote from William Wallace, played by Mel Gibson. He says, "Every man dies. Not every man really lives." And I think that that's so true. Did I want to stay where I was? And I would have had a fine life. It was a beautiful place. I had friends. I was, getting connected in the community. There was nothing wrong there, but that stirring was inside of me. And I knew that I had to make a choice. I'm going to butcher it, but it's that whole, the mountains are calling and I must go. And so then I'm down there, and for those of you that have tracked with my story or read the book, I got another call when I was down there to go, be amongst these men, this brotherhood, Warrior Week. And I met them, and I got another call, which was, hey, we want you to come be a part of this thing. And I went through it, and it rocked my world once again, because not shortly after did I meet, who would become my wife, Charlotte. And I was enamored. She lived in Phoenix, I lived in Mexico, and I said, I'm all in. I remember looking out at her. We were on this hike and seeing her and the city and the skyline, and she was illuminated by the moon. And I just said, I prayed, I said, God, there it is. There she is. So I moved without a full-time job. I moved without housing really, and I said, I'll figure it out. But I know this is where I'm going. And if you know my story, I got housing, got the job, we got married. Like, we started to build a life together. And then there was this stirring. In 2020, during COVID, I felt that I was supposed to write this book. You can see behind me, I have the coat right here. And the story is all wrapped around that, of this coat that I was too afraid to wear and started to embrace and embody. And I wanted to call other people into their identity, to embrace who they were, to step out, to start becoming. And it was the beginning of last year where God really just, put on my heart, it's time. And also I knew I had a son on the way. And so it was this culmination of all this hard work, throughout the year, just writing and getting the things that I have been taught and put on these pages. And amongst that time, I got another call, which is, hey, we got some young men that need some coaching. And so now I'm, walking alongside these young men and helping them, and even seeing myself inside of them from the, my upbringing, losing my parents, not having this guidance, always wondering what my dad would have said. Not as if I was a dad to them, but I could walk alongside them, the hardships in their life. And I felt so at home in that space, going, this is where I feel like my heart is aligned to the heart of my King. And so I write the book, and we get to this place, and I then, right after the book, felt this nagging voice of, we were moving forward. We had talked about moving back to Michigan, and I had started applying for some jobs, but every time I applied for a job, I was like, that's not it. That's not it. Nothing felt right. And that's when I had gone and seen the lead coach at Warrior Week, and there was an event that we were all together, and it wasn't right after that I was like, man, I remember in 2022, after I'd gone through that, God had just given me this vision for taking this beautiful program that helped men walk through the pain of their past so that they could rebuild again, and going, what would it look like to catch young men that have not had that and get them before the world eats them alive, and send them into the world so that at age 18, at age 19, at age 20, they already know who they are in Christ, and go live a life where becoming is the focus. So I sent him a message, and I said, hey, this is what I think we need to do. Would you guys get behind this? And he said, yeah, let's go. Let's go. Which then set in motion everything else. We got to rent a house. We got to make sure that, I have to leave a job and find other income, and all of this, and all in this space was depending on God. I remember my wife, literally Charlotte, looked at me, and I said, what if oh man, nothing's culminating right now. And she said, if God is calling us there, there's no way that he is going to just leave us high and dry. And thing after thing, job, place to stay, lining up. The last was renters. Weren't really getting any bites. We're trying to figure out, what we do. And I remember even looking at Charlotte and I said, well, if we don't get renters by the time we leave, we'll keep it posted. We're still going. And so we walked around the house 7 times, like some walls of Jericho, Joshua moment. And we prayed, and it was a week later. She had gotten everything ready to have this open house and people to come in and out. And no one came. So we're like, man, God, we really need you to show off. And not 3 hours later, someone messaged her, and it almost seemed too good to be true. And yet they were able to get on a lease, get everything situated. We have people that are moving to our house, like everything taken care of. It's not, and here's the deal. It's not always that easy. It's just not. I think of all of the times in between these big moments I just told you, and the worry and the anxiety and everything. And what would it look like to just have a posture of faith going, yes, but God's going to come through. People that show up praying for rain in a raincoat. Sure that it's going to rain. And even in these passages, the reality is that, not every act of faith ends with the renter calling. Not every act of faith ends in, this too good to be true story that I'm telling you right now. Even in Hebrews 11, it says, that at the end, this is kind of crazy. It talks about people being mocked, imprisoned, stoned, wandering in the desert, living in caves, never seeing a promise fulfilled. And it says the world was not worthy of them. And at the end of my days, I would rather live, truly live, and just see where it takes me. And that requires stepping out in faith. Yesterday's faith is today's obedience. But it is not sufficient for tomorrow's calling. We must continue to step forward. We must continue to become. In The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield writes, there is a force that will stop you. It will tell you the timing isn't right, that you're not ready, that someone else should do it. That's resistance, and resistance is not your friend. I think of the noise of this world trying to drown out this calling. Comfort will tell you to stay. But it's better to step and fall and never step at all. Move in the right direction. Something that I told my wife, and I'm like, we'll see how this pans out for me. But I've been reading the Bible all the way through this year, and I reread the story of Joshua, and I've always felt so connected to the story of Joshua. He was under Moses, but he was one of the 2 that when they looked at the promised land weren't afraid, wanted to go forward, and yet they wander in the desert for 40 years. People are dying off, and he is selected to be the leader. And yet the faith of yesterday was, Moses had come to the Red Sea, and he, has his staff and it parts in front of him. But for Joshua, it says, hey, wherever you put your foot, I will give you the land. See, I'm not giving you the faith of what Moses went through. That was for him. For you, it's wherever you put your foot, I will give it to you. So I get this in my head, and I'm like, hey, Charlotte, God said it. I know he's talking to Joshua, but, God said it. And so in my mind was wherever I put my foot. And I don't mean to sound ridiculous when I say it, but it was one of those things of just move forward, walk forward, be in that progression, become. I don't want to, God didn't make that covenant or that promise with me, but why not live and go, man, if that's where I that calling is, I'm walking in lockstep with God, then I would rather live than just die. And what we're going to be at the culmination at the end of my life, the things that I acquired, the comfort that I had, or being able to look back and go, man, we were all in for God's calling. We were all in for wherever He said go. Man, it didn't even make sense. We walked in faith and lived out the call. Yeah, that's the life I want to live. And so we step forward. We talk about why is the, faith of the past not enough. It's, once again, it's not to diminish or to take that away from anybody. But if my greatest achievements that happened in the past are what define me, where else am I going? There's so much future to live. I don't care if you're 20, I don't care if you're 40, I don't care if you're 70. I know some people who are at the late years in their life and they continue to keep pressing forward, zealous for what can still be accomplished, seeking out purpose. Because when you stop dreaming, when you stop becoming, you might not physically be dead, but you have come to a spiritual death that I never want to live. I don't want to live it. I don't want my wife to live it. I want to watch her become. And I don't want my son to grow up in a world where he watches his dad squander the gifts and the talents and the opportunities and anything else that God has given him. Because I want him to have that spirit of adventure. I want him to flex that faith muscle. And he would do far greater things than I would. And he wouldn't waste time, wouldn't waste life. That he would see that, man, this is how we walk with God. It is not a matter of, too many of us grew up around religion, doing the right thing. For him, it would be that heart of a man seeking the heart of his king, seeking that calling, stepping forward, a light bearer unto the world. That is what I want for my son. The world doesn't need any more religion. It doesn't need any more religion. It needs people that are willing to walk in faith, even when it turns their world upside down. I just think we have one of my coaches and he just says, do hard things. I literally could sum up so much of this podcast as do hard things, repeat. Do hard things, repeat. And it's crazy. Martin Luther King Jr. Said, take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. And so the question is, the lingering question for you is, where are you putting your foot? If you were promised, wherever you put your foot, I'll give you the land, would you even believe it? Would you be able to step forward in faith? Would you be consumed with doubt? Would you be consumed with excuses and stories that tell you every single reason why you can't? Or would you take that step and take that next step willing to fall, willing to risk it, willing to lose it all to pursue the heart of the King. Oh, man. Like I said, these moves are not made just for us. It's not even about having your life be put on display and be a stage for the world. When I wrote the Yellow Coat Club, there was a couple of different, motives in mind. One of them was a very, loving yet selfish thing, which is my dad died young. And I did not want my son to have to fill in the gaps of what would my father have done. And so I wrote him letters all throughout it. Little notes that he could understand that this was the heart of his father. And that he had a father that sought the heart of the father. But it also was an invitation. As I, stepping forward, or I look at the people in my life that I hear their stories about them stepping forward. Go listen to, the story or sermons of Erwin McManus. Go listen to the story of Nick Bear from Bear Performance Nutrition. I just got done reading Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. Go read these stories of people, or go listen to these stories of people stepping out again and again and again and again and again, willing to risk it. Be one of the daring ones. And I can only imagine that the people that watch and see those stories can't help but be inspired. But inspiration isn't enough. Does it activate something in you to say, because here's the reality, you can go live that life too. So many of us think that, well, I'm not him. Okay, yeah, you're you. Go be you. Dream bigger. Go become. Where are you putting your foot? One of the last things I'll leave you with is just another quote from the movie Shawshank Redemption. It said, get busy living or get busy dying. I mean, that's literally where we're at right now, the crossroads, wherever you're at in your life. And you could be someone who would go, man, I remember those steps of faith that I took. Amazing. Continue to take them. And then there are some people who say, I don't know if there's ever been a moment where I've taken a big, giant step of faith. You can start now. But it starts in a posture of seeking the heart of the Father. It starts with a posture of seeking after the heart of the King. The Creator who knows you, who created you to become what you were created to be. That's the story. That's the story. They're so intentional. You read the words in Scripture and they come off the page, so intentional about this roadmap for your life, but that one small invitation that changes everything. As for you, follow me. Follow me. Where are you putting your foot? Follow me. I want to thank you so much. And, thinking about where we're going, next time I record one of these, I will literally be in Michigan in a new spot. And I'm just amazed at what God continues to do. And I can't wait to see how, just things continue to unravel. I'm filing for 501c3 status on this nonprofit, working with some mission-driven organizations that I care about so much, spending time with family, being in creation with God, living life and just going, what do we got to lose? Where are you putting your foot? Follow me. Follow me. And as always, we'd appreciate your prayers in this. And if you want to engage, you can go to the Yellow Coat Club website or add me on Facebook, Instagram, and then we're also on YouTube as well. The Yellow Coat Club, you know the name. Thank you so much for tuning in, faithful listeners. I really appreciate it. And if you're a new time listener, I'd love to hear a bit of your story and get connected to you. So until next time, be well and take those steps. Don't live a life that feels small to you. Because I do know that when it seems impossible, those are those God-sized dreams. Those are those God-sized things. And he's a pretty impressive God, if I say so myself. All right. Thank you.